Hi everyone, I'm Dickson and I want to welcome you to a completely new study that we're going to begin today called the mechanics of fishing. Most of you have been with me through the last 4 or 5 weeks as we completed a study on structure. And before I actually introduce this new study, I want to not necessarily review what we've talked about, but I want to review a couple of reasons why we started our study series with structure. If you recall, in the very, very beginning, I said it's important for you and I, if we want to become really successful each and every time we go fishing, regardless of the lake we're fishing or the reservoir that we're fishing or the river that we're fishing or the species of fish involved or the season of the year or the weather and the water conditions, we want to catch fish. And in order to do that, we established that there was a lot of water out there in that lake or river that doesn't have any fish in it. About 90% of all water has no fish in it 100% of the time. So as we look at all of this water that we're faced with, we have to have a way to eliminate the unproductive water and arrive at the areas in a lake or a river where the fish are. If we have any chance to be successful, we have to be fishing where the fish are. We used to joke about it, but it's a real truism in fishing is we can't catch a fish if we're fishing where he ain't. And so many fishermen spend most of their fishing day fishing where there are no fish, and they have no chance. So we had to start our study, we were forced to start our study with where are the areas out here in this lake and in your lake where the fish are. If we can identify those spots, those areas of the lake that do have the fish, then we have a chance. Now that's where we're going to pick it up from here. We're going to have some very precise controls in our fishing in order to catch those fish. And we're going to hit every aspect of it, and we're going to begin that today. But because we began our study a few weeks ago right with structure, we didn't talk about what I normally refer to, what I normally would begin all of my fishing clinics with, or my fishing schools, with a study of the basic movements of fish. So before we begin our new study, I'm going to give you at least a little something, a long paragraph here, that's going to be a substitute for a 2 or 3 hour or 6 hour clinic that at least puts you in the right position for us to move forward. And the reason I'm moving to the subject of today, the mechanics of fishing, is because we're close to the fishing season. So in the order of how I would normally teach a new group of structure fishermen, skipping a couple of things and getting to this area of mechanics of fishing, what we're going to physically be doing in order to catch fish, because that's why we're in the game. But at the same time, I want you to keep this long paragraph that I'm going to give you right now, keep it in your mind at all times. And it goes something like this. This is our little shortcut clinic. Deep water is the home of the fish. Deep water is where an adult fish spends 90 to 95% of his entire lifetime, somewhere in deep water. And unfortunately, most of the time these fish are so deep, they're nearly impossible to catch. But we're saved due to the fact that they don't stay there all the time. Once or twice on a normal fishing day, these fish will move out of that deep water home and move towards the shallows. Now, how far they go and how long they stay will be completely dependent upon the conditions of the weather and the water. Now, we're saved again due to the fact that these fish don't just swim about haphazardly to get there. They have to have a route to follow. And we're saved because these routes are identifiable not only to the fish but to you and me. And we call these routes structure. The bottom of the lake that's different in some respects from the surrounding bottom area. That's what these fish follow on their movements towards the shallows and then to return back to their home area. So if we review that real quick, deep water is a home to fish. Once or twice a day, they're going to move. And when they move in this lake, they're going to follow bottom features called structure. We just did a whole study on it. Now, how far they go, how long they stay is going to be dependent on weather and water. That's a subject we're going to deal with sometime in the near future. And then they return back to that deep water home. Now, with that in mind, don't ever forget it. That's how we base everything that we're going to talk about, right on that little bit of mini clinic I just gave you. So as we move forward into our new study, the mechanics of fishing, everything we talk about is going to relate in some way or another to that little statement that I just gave you. So with that in mind, I wanted to make sure, if you hadn't been with us for all of the study on structure, I'd like you to go to my YouTube channel and study it, review it if you've already seen it, so that this next study that we're entering into will make a lot of sense to you. Because in the end, as I stated earlier, we're in this game to catch fish. Not catching fish is not fun. That's why so many young kids don't seem to be that interested in fishing today, because most of the time when they went with daddy, they weren't catching fish. And when you're not catching fish, they get bored, and so do I, and probably so do you. But when we're catching fish, it's a good day. Everybody's having fun. So the whole idea now is it's coming to the fishing season. So we're going to talk about some of these physical things that we have to control. And then we're going to also add to that the tools that are necessary to affect these controls. And then we're going to talk about proper casting and trolling, the actual presentation of lures. So that in the end, we're going fishing now, sort of, kind of. But in truth, the study that we've just come out of is just a beginning. That's putting us in the right areas in your lake. That's all that's doing. And in truth, we probably, if things were the way that I'd like them to be, we probably wouldn't be starting this discussion just yet, because we're not ready to. However, I know we're close to the fishing season pretty much all over the country. In fact, my son just landed in Toledo, Ohio today. He's going to be fishing out of Port Clinton for those early season walleye in Lake Erie. So even my son left Florida, go up there in that 32-degree weather to do a little fishing this weekend. So I know people are about ready to start that season. And catching fish is the one thing everybody wants to do. So I'm sort of rushing into this conversation a little before it's time. But as we go through our studies all through the summer months, regardless of the subject at the time, everything is going to be relating back to this physical mechanics of fishing, getting down to the fish and making a catch. Everything will be related one thing to the other. So even though it may seem a little early to beginning this study on tools, controls, casting, trolling, etc., I think it's necessary so most people can feel like they have a chance going fishing, even if they don't have all of the answers just yet. So as we begin this study, I also want to mention something before we actually get into it that's on my mind. Actually, two things. First thing is, one of my subscribers sent me a little email yesterday and asked me the question, do I still fish? After my wife and I had a good laugh about that, I answered him, of course, by email, but I want to make it clear to everybody. About 12 years ago, whatever it was, 14 years ago, I retired from earning a living fishing. But I can assure you I did not retire from fishing. And of course now, thanks to the encouragement of so many past customers, so on and so forth, and family members that have encouraged me to take advantage of this social media explosion, how you can go ahead and deliver the educational message to millions of people through the social media. And they got me involved in coming back to share my experiences and my knowledge that I've gained from Buck Perry over some 35 years of association. And I'm excited to do it, but I'm also just as excited today to take my grandsons fishing than I am to go fishing myself. So yeah, I'm still fishing, and I'm not planning on quitting anytime soon. So with that question answered, here's my second little thing that I want to bring up before I actually start talking about our new subject matter. And that is, I've got all of Buck's advanced material sitting in front of me here today. And I was talking with an old friend the other day, somebody who's been through this advanced material and been involved in fishing in the right way for the last 20 years or so. Darn good fisherman. Won't mention his name. It's not material to what we're talking about. But we had this long conversation. And he said to me, he always appreciated me because what Buck Perry was to me, I was in fact to him. I was the Buck Perry figure to him. I was the guy teaching him. And as much as that sounded like a compliment to me, it kind of made me smile because Buck was such a genius. And literally, he's one of those people that come around once in a century. He was a pioneer. He was really special, and I'm not. However, I was smart enough to become his disciple and learn from him because I was fortunate enough to catch fish with him that first day, and I knew that everything that he talked about from then on, it always made sense to me. It was all very logical. But I had an advantage that my students never had. They weren't fishing with Buck. They weren't hearing it verbally and then experiencing it with him at that time. And those are the occasions that cemented all of this information in my mind. I'll never forget it. I can recall things that happened 35 years ago. I can tell you the exact day, the exact time, what time of day it was, what the weather and water conditions were, what day of the month it was when this particular little something happened. It's because I was with the boss. He told me, that's one thing. And it's another thing to just read all of his material. You can read it all and know every word, be able to quote it chapter and verse. But if you haven't experienced it, it doesn't mean that much to you. And you'll never really become really good unless you experience some of it. So what I tried to do in all of my years of teaching was to take what I considered some very, very intellectually challenging material, everything that's in every one of these books, the advanced material. Buck was such a genius that he wrote in such a way that it seemed like he was just this good old boy from North Carolina, you know, kind of talk like that when you heard him talk. And you just thought he was a regular old guy. Well, he wasn't regular. And when he broke things down and wrote them and put it down on paper, it was so hard for most people to grasp. Buck didn't realize it. He just thought he was speaking in, you know, 101 Buck Perry. But the truth is, most of it was pretty hard to get a hold of for the average person, like me. My advantage, oh, big fish running around out here. Anyway, for people like me, hard to understand a lot of it, or at least get everything that Buck meant from it. But I had the advantage of I was with him. So not only did he tell me, he showed me. And then after he showed me, he retold me 2,700 times. So it all sunk in. It's all cemented up here. So I started thinking way back, if I were to be a successful teacher to young fishermen, to new fishermen, I had to somehow simplify everything he wrote down and put it in sort of an average way of saying it. I had to put everything into its proper importance from a standpoint of you and me going fishing and catching a fish. I didn't think that every one of us had to intellectually understand every word he wrote in order to be successful. One of the reasons I'm sharing some of my fishing, recalling some of my fishing experiences I had that were sort of strange or different at the time, to make a point and help you to sort of feel and gather from that experience what I did by being with Buck. And I thought today, when we begin our new study, I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about, where I'm going to try to simplify all of this material to you so that you can go fishing and catch fish. I'm going to try to break it down into its simplest form. That's what I've always tried to do in my teaching. And for those of you who want all of that intellectual understanding, which is important, I'm not saying it's not important. You know how to get a hold of the material. You just go to my website, and there's a link on there to Buck's Baits. Link on there, you get the special price, and you can get that material and read all about it.